we talked about what do you think will happen in the end times? Do you have strong views about it? And so we had that discussion off camera, but just think about that. Do you have strong views about the end times? And if you do, I'd like to challenge that tonight. We're talking about the book of Revelation. This is the very last book of the Bible, and it deals with the end of this world and new creation. So God is going to create a brand new, perfect world. But before he does that, this world is basically going to descend into hell in many ways. And the dreams of Satan's heart are going to come true in many ways. And God's going to allow him for a time to be basically the God of this world. Because right now that's not exactly happening, but it's going to finalize, and that's going to be allowed to happen in this end time. But what do the details of that look like? And so that's what we're going to talk about tonight. So before we get into it, what's the historical context for Revelation? So it was written by this guy named John the Beloved, and we're going to talk briefly about his life after Jesus' ascension. Remember, he was one of the 12 disciples who became apostles, and he preached and served God as an apostle in Jerusalem and Judea while taking care of Mary, Jesus' mother. When Jesus was dying, he told John, "This is now your mother. Take care of my mother." And so John did that until Mary died. And then after 12 years, King Herod Agrippa's persecution forced him and all other apostles to leave Judea and scatter around Israel and the Roman Empire. After Mary's death, John moved to Ephesus and became a leader in the Christian community at Ephesus. This is where he wrote his letters. During a time of Roman persecution of Christians under Emperor Domitian, John was captured and taken to Rome to be executed in a Colosseum. So in view of a large audience at the Colosseum, the Romans dropped John's entire body into boiling oil. But miraculously, John was completely unharmed by God's power. The entire Colosseum was so amazed that every single member of the audience immediately believed in Jesus and became Christians. The Roman emperor was furious, so he banished John to a small island called Patmos among the Greek islands. On this island, Jesus appeared to him and gave John the book of Revelation. So that's the background for it. So the Greek islands, as you can see on this map of the whole Mediterranean Sea, this was like the center of the ancient world. Israel's down here. And so the Greek islands are just northwest of Israel in this red box. And then zooming in on that area, these are the Greek islands closer up, you can see the island of Patmos in the red star in the red square. And then here's a picture of the island of Patmos if you were standing on one of the other islands looking at it from afar. And so there's these 7 Christian communities or churches that Jesus told John to make the book of Revelation a letter to. So it's actually technically a letter. Like we talked about the 21 letters of the New Testament last week. Technically, it's 22. But Revelation is very different than all the other letters because it's also a prophecy of the end times, the end of the world. So here are these 7 communities that Jesus told John to send this letter of Revelation to. Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea. And there you can see them there on the map. They're all on the west side of Turkey, at the beginning of the Greek islands. Here's another closer up map of them. There you can see all of them and a theme of how Jesus describes each of them in Revelation, because each of them has a theme of how they're described. So the first one is Ephesus. It's the loveless church. And then Smyrna is the persecuted church. Pergamum is the compromising church. Thyatira is the corrupt church. Sardis is the dead church. Philadelphia is the faithful church, which, by the way, Philadelphia, you probably heard of the city in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, named after this place and this church, faithful church. And then Laodicea, the lukewarm church. And this is a menorah, and why it's here is because the churches in Revelation are compared to a lampstand, really 7 lampstands. But it's probably likely that it was referring to a menorah, because the menorah was the holiest lamp in the Bible. It was in the temple of God. God gave Moses the instructions on how to build it. It's Jewish, yes, exactly. That's part of the point. Yeah, that's part of the point. It's a Jewish lamp. And so it was a very holy lamp. It was in the temple. But if you notice, there's 7 different branches on there. And those are the 7 churches. And so with that, we're going to go into the outline of Revelation. This is a revelation the Father, God, gave Jesus Christ to give to John the Beloved. And John wrote these things in a letter to 7 ancient Christian communities. So Jesus visits John in a vision. That's how it starts. And he appears as the Son of Man, which is the vision that Daniel received. That's how John sees him. He's the Son of Man, and he has this menorah, this lamp, 7 lamps, and there's 7 stars, which represent the angels of these 7 churches. And Jesus' message to these 7 Christian communities or churches is different. And so I've summarized the messages in these 7 points under point C there. And it goes like this. So Ephesus, the main message is remember your first love. For them, they started out really loving God. But then all the hard things in this world made their love grow cold. So they didn't love God anymore. And so he told them, remember your first love. You're going to see dates next to each of them. And the dates, there's a theory that it comes from this book. I'll show you this book for a second. It's called The Book of Revelation, Church History. I've known about this since elementary school, maybe junior high. It's a very interesting book. I'm not saying that it's true, but it has this theory that these 7 churches are actually 7 time periods in the future, leading to the end times. So what you see here on this chart, and there's actually on the back of this book, you can see a little timeline. But on your chart, on the points of the outline, you can see dates, and those are the dates according to this theory of each church. So Ephesus was from 30 to 100 AD, Smyrna 100 to 300, etc., going all the way to present day. So according to this theory, we are living in the age of Laodicea, which is the lukewarm church. But this is just a theory. I'm not telling you that this is true. I'm just giving you the information. We can talk about it more later if you want, but I'll leave it at that for now. So Smyrna, the main message to Smyrna is don't give up even when your persecution is great, because that church was persecuted like no other. Pergamum, the message was don't allow serving God for gain. This was the mistake of Balaam. Balaam was a man who is considered a false prophet, not because his prophecies weren't true, because everything he said was true. He was right on. But he did it for gain. He did it to get rich. He did it for himself, for his own glory, not for God's glory. And so the message to this church is you have Balaams among you. You have men like this who are serving God just to get rich and be famous. Don't let them be there. Get rid of those people. Next is Thyatira. The message Jesus gives to Thyatira is don't tolerate fleshly indulgences. And this is the bad example of Jezebel. And this is where the idea of the Jezebel spirit comes from, if you've ever heard of that. There's a lot more in there, but it really comes from this verse and the example of Jezebel in Elijah's story that we talked about back when we were talking about kings. Thyatira had these Jezebels, these not just women, but also men that were really turning serving God into getting what you want and fleshly indulgence and lust and all these other worldly things. Next is Sardis, and the message that Jesus gives to Sardis is avoid partial service to God and stay clean. Even though the world is dirty, stay clean. And then Philadelphia, this is the only one that Jesus doesn't really criticize. He just praises them for their good work. And he says, keep up the excellent work in my word. And finally, Laodicea, the message is be hot or cold, Jesus says, not lukewarm. Lukewarm means when you're trying to serve God on the one hand, but also live your life in the world and get everything you want from the world. You're trying to be 2 things at once. Really, you're being a hypocrite. And there's been Christians like that all throughout history. However, Jesus said for Christians like this, it's disgusting to him. And in the original language, it literally says he will vomit them out of his mouth. So he'll throw up because it makes him sick that people do that. And he'll spit them out. So he would rather you be cold. So hot or cold means either live for God completely, be on fire for God, do everything for him, make him your passion, your obsession, your everything, or hate him, despise him, have nothing to do with him, persecute his people, make fun of his people, mock his people, and don't say that you're one of them. Don't say that you're one of them. People need to hear that today. After this, the book continues in Revelation chapter 4. We see that John suddenly goes into the highest heaven. Is this the rapture? So at each point in the book, I'm going to put rapture question mark, as you see on here. And it's because different Christian traditions interpret the rapture of being at each of these places. So this is the pre-trib rapture. I'll talk about that more later. So is this the rapture? John goes into the highest heaven. John sees a sealed scroll, the lion lamb, who's both a lion and a lamb, Jesus, who is the only one worthy to open the scroll. The lamb opens the 7 seals. There's 7 seals on this scroll. So he breaks all 7 of the seals, leading to the 7 trumpets, which bring Yahweh's vengeance and rage on the whole earth. God's people are identified and marked with protection from all the sufferings. They come from every tribe of Israel and all nations. So those that belong to God during this time, however they're on the earth, somehow there's people that belong to God that are on the earth at this time. They're marked and they're not going to suffer through all these things that happen. It's just going to be on, kind of like in the story of the Exodus, when all the plagues that were coming on Egypt were not coming on the Israelites. In the same way, that's how it will be at the end, but it'll be on the whole world, and only God's people will be protected. So everyone who continues rejecting God is tormented to the point of begging for death. It says they will wish that they could die, but they will not be able to die. Very interesting and scary thought. And then some of them are killed and forced to witness the greatest acts of God's power ever done. And then after this, John sees a heavenly war with the dragon connected with a woman that continues on earth with the dragon's two beasts who force people to take a mark, which is given as the number 666. You probably heard this before. That's been made very famous. And they need to take this mark if they want to buy or sell, or basically have money. They need this mark for that at this time. And so there's this question like, okay, what exactly does this mean? Does this have to do with humanity, Satan, this Gentile? Is there this Gentile antichrist and a Jewish false prophet? That's one way some people interpret it, because it talks about a beast from a land, which in the Bible is a symbol for the Jewish people, and a beast from the sea, which in the Bible is a symbol for Gentiles. So is that what it's talking about? I'm not saying it is, but that's a question raised in this, so I put that on the outline. Is this a review of events that already happened in the previous section that we talked about, Revelation 5 through 11? So is Revelation 12 and what comes after it just a repeat of the same events? That's another way of interpreting it. There's a lot of ambiguity here because there's a lot of pictures, like Daniel and Michael were talking about with the head of a man and the long hair and these locust bodies. There's a lot of these pictures. So what exactly does it mean? There's all these different ways of interpreting it. Next, after these things, John sees the Lamb standing on the Mount of Olives. The Lamb is Jesus, remember. So Jesus standing on the Mount of Olives with 144,000 Israelites. Then there's these three angels that fly over the whole earth to preach the gospel and announce the coming final judgment. So for anyone who hasn't heard the gospel, the news of Jesus at this time, it says that these angels will fly over the whole world and preach, Jesus is God, He came and He died for your sins, and He rose again, believe in Him. And so everyone will have a chance, literally at the last minute, who hasn't heard about it, based on what this is saying. Crazy, huh? And then after this, the Son of Man, that's Jesus, reaps the earth's harvest. And is this the rapture? John sees 7 angels pour out 7 bowls filled with 7 final plagues of God's fury onto the earth. And this is preparation for the final battle at Armageddon. So there's going to be this final battle. It's not really a battle. It's really just God comes and whoops Satan's butt, like one last time. But like they're preparing for this final battle. Satan puts together this massive force, and Jesus is just going to come and wipe it all out like it's nothing. There's this entity that's called Babylon. But remember, we talked about how in Hebrew, there is no such thing as Babylon. It's Babel, as in the Tower of Babel. And that's trying to bring to your mind, remember, it was at Babel that the sons of God, or those angels, those princes, those leading angels, deceived the 70 nations and took them away from God. So it wants to bring that image to your head. So Babel is condemned as a harlot who led all nations astray. And then after this, the resurrected Jesus returns in full glory and power with all holy angels and God's people. Is this again the rapture at the very end here? Maybe. Condemning the 2 beasts and imprisoning Satan. And then at this point, Jesus reigns as king over the whole earth for 1,000 years. Jesus actually comes to the earth and He'll be here. Everybody will see Him and He'll be king of the world. Like the most powerful person on earth right now is probably the president. Maybe you could debate that, I guess. But at this time, Jesus will be the Lord of the earth. Like whether you want to or not, people are going to be serving Him. And because of that, some people are going to hate that reign. Even though Jesus is going to do all these good things, nobody's going to be dying of starvation. During that time, there's going to be world peace. But guess what? A lot of these things that we have now might not exist. Like Jesus, like some people think, like our phones, He's going to like destroy all our phones. Like our phones will be destroyed in the process of the end, and there'll be no phones. Things may be very simple, like back in the Bible days. We don't know. But the point is, He'll be the Messiah, and it'll be revealed, but some people are still going to hate Him, and they're going to wish that Satan would come back. And I don't know why or how that is, but that's what it says. they're going to want a second coming of Satan. And because God has this agreement with the devil, Satan's going to get a second coming. So Satan returns briefly, and this is in Revelation, I'm not making this up, it's in the passage right there. Satan returns briefly only to be thrown into the lake of fire with all his followers. And then God establishes the new creation with the New Jerusalem as capital, and himself and Jesus as the literal light. It says there's no more sun. God being there is the sun, and there's no darkness anymore. And the king over all creation. And that is the end of the story, the very happy ending we look forward to. And so our highlighted verse with that is Revelation 21, 3-4. I shortened it a bit. It says, "Behold, God's home is with humans, and he will live with them. They will be his people, and he will wipe away every tear from their eyes. And there will no longer be death. There will no longer be mourning or crying or pain." Okay, so we're going to close tonight. We're almost done. We're just going to close by talking about some of the debates. So this is the dangerous debates about the end times, because they are dangerous. And what I mean by that is that people can lose their faith over believing in one particular thing that's going to happen too much. You got to be really careful not to make it all about predicting the end times, because some people are still really into that to this day. There's three main questions. First, when and how exactly will Jesus return to the earth and establish God's kingdom? So there's many false predictions throughout Christian history. Is Jesus' return literal or figurative? Is Jesus' return a set date in future history, or is his return conditional, depending on how well Christians spread the gospel worldwide? Next, what does 666 really mean? There's a literal mark theory, which is the theory that it's literally, people will have to get a tattoo of 666 on their forehead or on their hand. But really, if you think about it, that almost seems too obvious. Yeah. But I'm not saying that that's not true. Maybe it will be obvious. Then there's the electronic chip theory. I think Kara was kind of mentioning this earlier. So this is the theory that they're going to put a chip into your hand, and somehow that's going to relate to 666, and you won't be able to do anything without having this chip put in your hand. Then there's the barcode theory. So everything that you buy, this is going to trip you guys out, has a barcode on it. Everything today has a barcode, right? Like, see this barcode right here? Well, guess what, guys? This is crazy. If I could blow it up for you, I'd show you. But each of these individual bars represents a number. Guess what every single barcode, and I mean every single one, has at the front, at the back, and in the middle? 6. The same number. 666. Every single barcode. Finally, the internet theory. Did you know that in Hebrew, the alphabet, there's a letter W, and in Hebrew there are no numbers. The numbers are the letters. So the letter that is W is actually the number that is 6. So www.666 in Hebrew .the internet. Coincidence? Maybe. I don't know. I'm just pitching this stuff to you guys because it's trippy when you think about it. Well, maybe because it is. You'd have to understand Hebrew to recognize that, right? So maybe this is just people overthinking it. But people have made these observations. So I'm just bringing them to your attention to say that it's interesting. But it also goes to show that people can overthink this stuff, right? No. I think so. I mean, you can overthink, but also it could be true. So it's about keeping an open mind. A big part of what I'm trying to get you guys to do in this study is thinking with a more open mind about things. Because some people are so narrow-minded in the way that they think. But that goes both ways. I don't want you to look at this and be like, oh, we have barcodes, we have the internet, the Antichrist is here. So I just want to get you guys thinking about it. The next question is, should the book of Revelation be taken literally or figuratively? So there's this prophecy view that this is literal future history. It hasn't happened yet, but this is literally going to happen in the future at a time that we know, that we can predict, or that we don't know. There's both views on that. Then there's this view called the preterist view. And a lot of Christians haven't heard about this, but this is the view that this has already been fulfilled. This is past, and all of this, except Jesus' return, maybe, was fulfilled by 70 AD when the Jerusalem temple was destroyed for the second time by the Romans, which we'll talk about next week. And then there's mixed views that kind of combine the two of them. But so some people actually treat Revelation as history and not as future events. So many false predictions throughout Christian history. This is not all of them, but here's some highlighted examples. So 500 AD, 500 years after Jesus came, they said Jesus is coming back. He didn't come. April 6, 793, Jesus is coming back. Didn't come. January 1st, 1000. That kind of makes sense. The year 1000, Jesus is coming back. But guess what? He didn't come. 1260 AD, Jesus coming back. He didn't come. 1370 AD, didn't come. February 20th, 1524, didn't come. October 19th, 1533, at 8 a.m. specifically, he didn't come. And be thinking, every time there's a false prediction, people are losing their faith over it, right? Like, just sad. So, their faith being rocked or redefined. Which, that part is a good thing if their faith makes it through that. So 1694 AD, Jesus didn't come. 1700 AD didn't come. 1757 AD didn't come. And I didn't include all of them, but there was at least one every century. Every century there was at least one that said this time Jesus is coming back. December 25th, Christmas, 1814, there was a woman who made this prediction, Jesus is coming back. Here's the trippy thing about this one. This was a very interesting story when I read it, so I wanted to comment on that. The woman who made this prediction mysteriously died of natural causes, not killing herself, natural causes, on this date of her prediction. Whoa. She just so happened to die on the date she predicted it. So Jesus came back for her on that day, which is really interesting. So next was September 15th, 1823. Didn't come back. 1836, John Wesley said Jesus was coming back this year. He was the founder of the Methodist Church denomination. He was a great guy, but he was wrong about this prediction. In October 22nd, 1844, they said he was going to come back. He didn't come back, but guess what? The Seventh-day Adventist Church denomination grew out of people that were involved in that prediction. And then in 1874, the founder of the Jehovah's Witnesses, who began teaching even after this year passed, said that Jesus had returned invisibly, because they said he was going to come back, but when he didn't come, they're like, no, he came. He's here invisible. We just can't see him yet. And those are the Jehovah's Witnesses. So I don't know if they still believe that, actually, to be fair, but originally. Next was 1891. Joseph Smith, the founder of the LDS Church, also known as the Mormons, implied, though he later took it back, that Jesus would arrive by this year. That was 100 years before I was born. 1988, the year my parents got married, they said Jesus was coming back. Didn't come back. 2000 AD, I was alive by this point. That makes sense. 2000, well, Jesus didn't come back. Y2K, for those that were alive. Everybody was all like, technology's going to shut down into the world. Guess what? We're still here. So I remember this one, October 21st, 2011. I was in college at the time. Everybody's like, he's coming back, he's coming back. I knew he wasn't, well, I didn't know for sure, but I was like, he's not coming back. It was just so funny. July 22nd, 2020, Jesus didn't come back. It was COVID. People were losing their minds. And there's a future prediction, very popular right now. Actually, it has been since 2010, but it's really blowing up. They made a movie about it. It's called Messiah 2030. And they'll tell you in 1 hour why Jesus is coming back in the year 2030. And other ideas are a variation of this. They say maybe not 2030, but between 2030 and 2040. And the reason behind why they think this is because that's 2,000 years since the year Jesus died. 2030 will be 2,000 years since Jesus died on the cross. So that's why they think, okay, 2,000 years since that happened, Jesus is coming back. But guess what? Don't be surprised if he doesn't come back. So, not ever, but in 2030. Because as you can see, this is a terrible track record for false predictions. Yeah. So that's the false predictions. Next is Jesus' return literal or figurative? And there's 3 different views Christians have on this. The first one, which is my view, and a popular view with the culture I grew up in, which is Protestant, dispensationalist, Foursquare, there's different names for it, Baptist, but it's called premillennialism. And all of these have millennialism in it. The word millennialism means 1,000 years. So we talked about the period of 1,000 years that Jesus is reigning on the earth, right? So there's a debate, is that literal or figurative? So in premillennialism, that's the literal view of the Bible, if you take the Bible literally, Jesus is literally going to come back. He's coming to Israel. He's going to fly around the whole earth. It says every eye will see him, every knee will bow. It's going to be crazy. He'll land on the Mount of Olives. It'll split in 2. Makes me think of like a superhero movie. Like there's all these angels and every knee will bow, and then he'll be like the reigning king from Jerusalem. I believe that. I think it'd be epic. I don't know when that's going to happen or what the circumstances will be, but it'd be pretty cool. But with that, there's a secondary debate with those that hold this view about the rapture, which is this event where Jesus just snatches people out of their bodies and they're taken to heaven. And if you've seen the movie Left Behind, they show like people's clothes are like left behind and stuff like that. And so it's a view based on the Bible, but it's not necessarily proven. Like there's different views of it. So there's the pre-tribulation rapture view. So tribulation is in all these. Tribulation is talking about that 7-year period that I mentioned where there's all this suffering on the earth. God unleashes all these plagues. Satan's allowed to rule the world for this time. And this 7-year period of time is called the tribulation. So the question is, are Christians going to be taken up to heaven before the tribulation, during, in the middle of it, or after it? And those are the 3 views. So pre-trib is Christians are going to be taken before the tribulation. But then you have to answer, well, then why are there still Christians in Revelation on the earth when these things are happening? Well, people think, well, they're just going to come to God because of the rapture. Maybe. That's one view. Another view is the mid-tribulation. So Christians will start out on the earth, but then they're going to get taken in the middle of it. Post-tribulation is they're going to go through all the suffering Christians with, although it says they won't be harmed, even if they are going through it. Revelation says God protects them somehow. But in this view, they'll still see it. They'll witness it. All these people will be dying. They'll be protected. And then they'll be raptured at the very end. But then it just seems kind of weird. We're just like being caught up to ride the roller coaster down with Jesus. Woo! Yeah, I'm over. But yeah, so maybe. Next is pan-tribulation rapture. And I've barely heard anyone believe this view, but this is my personal view because I just think it makes sense. They're all true. So some Christians will be taken before, some will be taken in the middle, and some will be taken at the very end. Next is postmillennialism. So postmillennialism is a view of many Protestants, not Catholics, but Protestants, not the tradition I grew up in. But in this view, it also goes with, by the way, if you've heard of the 7 Mountains Mandate and the New Apostolic Reformation, although I think that's derogatory toward those that are labeled with that. That's a whole other discussion. Michael might know more about it. I don't know. But I know that a lot of people in that background have this view, postmillennialism. So what is it? Literally means after the 1,000 years. So in this view, Jesus will return when the earth becomes righteous through the influence of the saints. So Christians on earth bring the prophecies of the millennium to fulfillment. And so in other words, Jesus is reigning on the earth for 1,000 years through us, bringing the holiness of God to the earth through the Holy Spirit and all this stuff. And then once the earth for 1,000 years has all this peace and prosperity through the Christians, then Jesus will come. So Jesus is waiting for us to make the earth good enough for him to return. I don't believe this personally, but it is a view that a lot of people have. Finally, we have amillennialism. This is the historic view during medieval times of all Christians, and it's the Catholic view today. In this view, there is no literal millennium. The 1,000 years is a symbol. It's just a symbol like everything else. The kingdom of God is already reigning on earth now. Jesus reigns invisibly through the Pope. We have the Pope, and he's in charge. He's the man. At one point, he was the most powerful man on earth. And so it made sense to think this way if you were Roman or European and connected in that way. And so in this view, Rome is God's kingdom. The literal nation becomes God's kingdom. This is a particularly jacked up view, in my opinion. And this view is part of the reason in church history that the church and Christians became so evil in church history because of this view. Because they viewed themselves and their nation as God's kingdom. So they could do whatever they wanted and they have God's blessing because they are in Jesus' place. This view is also called Christendom, which is Christianity as an imperial, nationalistic nightmare, in my opinion. It's a nightmare because that's the story of medieval times, all the bad stuff that happened during that time. We'll talk about that next week. And to be fair, all these views I'm presenting are just a fraction of what's out there. But part of what I'm trying to show you tonight is there's so many different, because Revelation is future, or many of us believe that it is, there's just so many different ways of viewing it, and we don't know. And I'm not trying to hurt your faith. I'm trying to challenge it. You know what I mean? I don't want your faith to rest in, Jesus is coming back during my lifetime, because what if he's not? And I don't want to hurt anybody by that, but we don't know. You know what I mean? People have thought that.
He's going to destroy the world, or he's going to make the world better?
No, he's going to make the world perfect. What Jewish people believe the Messiah is he comes and he establishes world peace and makes everything perfect. And what I believe as a Christian in my interpretation is that that's what Jesus will do when he comes again. But we're waiting for him to do that, yeah. Because we can't do it. That's my perspective on it. We can do our best. We should, but yeah. No villain ever thought they were a villain, despite what Disney will tell you. When you really think about it. It's so funny because in Disney and kids' cartoons, the villains are all like, I'm evil and I love it. It's like, no, every villain thinks that they're the good guy. They think that they're the hero. Even Satan believes that. I genuinely believe Satan thinks that God is evil and that he's trying to save people from God. I really believe that's how Satan thinks, which is what makes him so twisted. Finally, is Jesus' return a set date in future history, or is his return conditional? So there's three views on this side, and they can be overlapped here. So one perspective, I call it the sovereignty perspective, which is that God, as king, has set a specific date in time that will never change. He's coming back in the future. It's not going to change. It's always been that way. It always will be that way. And that's, I think, how a lot of Christians typically think about it. But that's not the only way to think about it. Another view is I call it the Gentile free will perspective, which is that God is actually waiting for all nations to hear about Jesus and be saved, because God doesn't want anyone to perish. He wants everyone to hear the good news and accept Jesus and be saved. And based on this perspective, there's this thing that's known as the 1040 window. Michael and I learned about it in school. You probably remember this, Michael, in our evangelism class. See this map right here? There's a yellow window of these countries. It's in North Africa, in Asia here, basically North Africa and Asia, all the way through China. And 97% of the world's people that have never heard about Jesus, don't even know the story of the gospel that we've been talking about, live within this territory. And so in this view, God is waiting for people to rise up, go to these places, and reach everybody they can, to villages. There's villages out there that don't have contact or barely have any contact with the outside world. And so in this view, God's waiting for people to go, to love these people enough, to lay down their lives and go. God's waiting for that before Jesus comes back. So that's the Gentile free will perspective. But then there's the Jewish free will perspective. And in this perspective, God is actually waiting for the Jewish people, who are still God's people with the Christians. God's waiting for the Jewish people to accept Jesus as their Messiah and say, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." And when the Jewish leadership does that, specifically the leadership, because many Jewish people already love Jesus and follow him and believe he's their Messiah. But when the leadership does that, then Jesus will come. And this is based on, all these views are based on the Bible and verses in the Bible. I'm not showing you all the verses for the sake of time, but I'm presenting the information to you. So no matter what is true exactly, there's one simple truth: there will be paradise forever and ever. And that's clear no matter what in the Bible, if we believe it. So however Jesus finally returns, his return brings the establishment of the new heavens and the new earth, a brand new world that's perfect. This will be the Garden of Eden everywhere. So not just this one little garden, but the whole earth will be like Eden. This will be paradise for all God's people, God's faithful ones, from the Jewish people and all other nations throughout history. So there's some view, I think I talked about it, where there's Egyptians there, like ancient Egyptians, but there's also Americans there. So there's representatives from every culture there, and we'll be able to interact with each other. It's a really cool view, and talk about what it was like to be faithful to God in each time period. And there's no more pain in this new world, and there's no more suffering, there's no more problems anymore. It's perfect. And that is our hope as Christians, ultimately. And so the Bible begins with a marriage in Genesis. And then the Old Testament ends with a divorce, we talked about. But then the Bible here ends with a marriage, and it's the marriage of heaven and earth. God's home and our home, the earth, become one, and God lives with us in this marriage, the ultimate marriage. Every other marriage is pointing to that, according to the Bible. And so we close with this verse: the kingdom of God on earth as it is in heaven. It says in Revelation 7, 9 through 10, "After these things I looked, and behold, a great multitude, which no one could count, from every nation and all tribes and peoples and tongues, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robes, and palm branches were in their hands. And they cry out with a loud voice, saying, 'Liberation belongs to our God, who sits on the throne, and to the Lamb.'" And that is our walk through the entire Bible. Congratulations, everyone. You've made it. You made it. Thank you for being a part of it. So there's 4 more lessons we're going to talk about in the next 4 weeks, every Monday night. It's going to be church history and Jewish history, and thinking about what does it mean to be part of God's people in light of this whole story that we've been talking about. So we're going to focus on that and answer some deep questions. What do we call ourselves as God's people? How can it be that Jewish people are God's people, but Christians are also? Is that true? We're going to be talking about all these types of things in these final weeks, and looking forward to talking about that with you guys. And so, God, I thank you for this opportunity to learn about you together and to grow in our faith through this study. I ask you to bless everyone here tonight and throughout this whole week. In Jesus' name, amen.